Mutant Island, Chapter 1, The Arrival. The helicopter blades whirred, chopping through the air as Elora, Kale, Owen, and Sarah peered down at the small, uncharted island. Below them, a dense jungle swallowed the landscape, hiding whatever secrets the government had entrusted to them. This was no vacation, they were here for a project, a lab filled with genetic mutations, and the rumors were both fantastic and terrifying. As the helicopter descended onto a small, concrete helipad, a figure emerged from a nearby building. He was small, no taller than 4.5 feet, and looked no older than 11. He wore a pristine white lab coat that seemed comically oversized. "Welcome," the boy said, his voice surprisingly deep and confident for his age. "I am Jace, the head of this facility." Elora, the group's unofficial leader, stepped forward. "You're the head scientist? We were told to expect someone else." Jay smiled, a glint of amusement in his eyes. "Underestimate me at your own peril. What I lack in height, I make up for intelligence. Now, if you'll follow me, I'll give you a tour. There's a lot to see." He led them down a long hallway, past doors marked with strange symbols. The air grew colder, and a faint, acrid smell of chemicals filled their nostrils. "The first thing I want to show you," Jace announced, stopping before a large, reinforced metal door, "is my greatest achievement, my masterpiece." The door slid open with a hiss, revealing a massive, dimly lit enclosure. Inside, a creature, half man and half beast, prowled in the shadows. It was impossibly large, nearly 30 feet tall, with a lean, muscular frame and a sleek, feline head. Its eyes glowed a vibrant, unnatural green. Jace grinned. "Behold," he said, "the giant cat human. Fast, agile, and incredibly aggressive. It is, in my professional opinion, the scariest thing on this island." As the giant cat human's glowing eyes fixed on them, a low growl rumbled deep in its chest, vibrating through the air and making the ground tremble. Keel instinctively took a step back, his eyes wide with fear. Sarah gripped Owen's arm, her knuckles white. Jace, however, seemed completely unfazed, a glint of pride in his eyes. "Don't worry," Jay said, his voice a calm counterpoint to the beast's menacing snarl. "The enclosure is designed to withstand a lot more than just a few angry roars." He gestured toward the far end of the habitat, where a second, smaller cat human emerged from the shadows. "There are two of them, actually, a male and a female. They are my most complex creations." The female was just as tall as the male, her feline features a bit more refined but her aggressive stance just as pronounced. She stopped toward the male, and the two let out a series of clicking sounds and low growls, their own form of communication. "It took me 3 years to perfect them," Jace continued, his voice full of a cold, scientific reference. 3 years of trial and error, of late nights and countless experiments. The process was difficult. Their genetic makeup is a blend of feline and human DNA, but the human portion is more complex than a simple splicing. I had to use specialized growth hormones and a unique cellular restructuring process. It's a very delicate balance. One wrong move, and the entire project would have failed. And these two are just the beginning. I'm working on a new species now, a fusion of reptiles and humans. The results are promising." The group stared, a mix of awe and terror on their faces. The cat humans continued their strange communication, their tails flicking back and forth in a slow, rhythmic pattern. The air in the enclosure was thick with a scent of ozone and animal musk. "Are they sentient?" Elora asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jace's smile widened. "Not in a way you and I would understand. Their intelligence is different. It's primal, instinctive. They're capable of problem solving, but their thought process is entirely focused on survival and dominance. And that," he added, a hint of something darker in his eyes, "is what makes them so dangerous." Mutant Island, Chapter 2, The Lab. After showing them the terrifying cat humans, Jace led the group deeper into the complex. The sterile, silent hallways gave way to a massive, bustling laboratory. Scientists in white lab coats, some no older than Jace himself, bustled around, hunched over monitors and peering into bubbling beakers. The air hummed with the soft whir of machinery and the faint, sweet and sour smell of genetic sequencing. "Welcome to the heart of it all," Jace announced, spreading his arms wide. "This is where all the magic happens." We've got projects in every stage of development, from simple splicing to advanced organ synthesis. He pointed to a row of large tanks filled with a cloudy, viscous liquid. Inside, strange, embryonic shapes floated in the glow of the overhead lights, their forms not yet distinguishable. Keel, no longer shaking, pointed to a group of scientists gathered around a large, transparent tube. "What are they working on over there?" Jace's grin returned. "Oh, that's one of our more ambitious projects. We're attempting to combine the DNA of a saltwater crocodile with a Spinosaurus. It's an incredibly difficult process. The Spinosaurus genome is so ancient, and the crocodile genome is deceptively complex. The goal is to create a creature with the predatory intelligence of a crocodile and the sheer size and ferocity of a Spinosaurus. Imagine a beast that can hunt on both land and in water, with jaws powerful enough to crush a car and a sail on its back for heat regulation." As he spoke, a tremor ran through the lab, and a loud, sharp crack echoed from the direction of the project. A scientist shouted, "He's agitated." Jace strode over to the station, his small frame radiating authority. He peered into the tube, where a large, scaly embryo thrashed violently. The glass of the tube began to spiderweb, thin cracks spreading across its surface. "It's a side effect of the accelerated growth hormones," he explained, a flicker of concern on his face. "The specimen is developing too quickly, and its instincts are overriding the inhibitors." With a flick of his wrist, he pressed a button on a nearby console. A low, calming hum filled the air, and the embryo began to settle down. The cracks in the glass stopped spreading. "See," Jay said, turning back to the group. "Problem solved." He didn't seem to notice the beads of sweat on the scientist's brows, or the collective sigh of relief that swept through the lab. He was already moving on. "Over here," he said, gesturing to a different section, "we have the aviary projects. We are trying to create a species of giant, sentient birds. They have the ability to mimic human speech, but we've yet to see if they can understand it. They're getting closer, though. The latest batch showed signs of being able to solve basic puzzles. We think they can even learn to play chess." Mutant Island, Chapter 3, The Vision. After a tour of the 98 mutant species on the island, each one more unsettling and fantastic than the last, Elora, Keel, Owen, and Sarah were led to the living quarters. The place was a small dormitory-style building, separate from the labs but still within the secure compound. It was clean and sterile, with rows of identical bunks, and a common area where a few tired scientists were sipping coffee and staring blankly at a television screen. Jace dismissed them with a curt nod. "Get some rest. We'll continue the tour in the morning, and don't wander off. The perimeter defenses are active, and they're not friendly to unauthorized movement." His warning was casual, almost an afterthought, but it hung in the air, heavy and serious. That night, Elora tossed and turned in her bunk. She was used to strange places and stranger assignments, but this one felt different. There was a lingering feeling of dread, a knot in her stomach that wouldn't loosen. Just as she was finally drifting off, a nightmare took hold. In her dream, the power went out. The lights in the lab flickered and died, plunging the facility into darkness. She could hear the alarms blaring, a frantic, high-pitched scream that echoed through the hallways. Doors were crashing open, and the ground shook with heavy, thudding footsteps. Through the chaos, she saw them, the creatures. The giant cat humans were tearing through the hallways, their green eyes glowing like malevolent stars. The crocodile's Spinosaurus hybrid had smashed its way out of its tank, its roars deafening as it hunted in the shadows. She saw scientists running, their terrified screams abruptly cut short. The nightmare culminated in a horrific tableau, a giant, winged beast, a hybrid of a raven and a bat, snatching a man from the roof of the compound and disappearing into the night. She saw Jace, standing in the middle of the carnage, a look of profound terror on his face as his creations turned on him. Elora woke with a gasp, drenched in a cold sweat. Her heart pounded against her ribs like a trapped bird. She sat up, her eyes darting around the dark room. Everything was silent. The only sound was the soft breathing of her friends. She tried to tell herself it was just a dream, a byproduct of the day's events, but the images were so vivid, so real, they felt like a premonition. The next morning, at breakfast, Elora was quiet, pushing a piece of toast around on her plate. "What's wrong?" Owen asked, noticing her somber mood. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Elora recounted her nightmare, her voice low and shaky. "They all escaped. The cat humans, the Spino-Croc hybrid. It was a complete massacre. I saw Jace, too." He looked terrified. The others tried to comfort her, telling her it was just a bad dream. But as Jace walked in, a small, knowing smile on his face, a shiver went down Elora's spine. She told him about the dream, too, hoping he would see the gravity of the situation. Jace, however, just laughed, a sound so bright and innocent it was a jarring contrast to the subject matter. "Elora, stop overreacting," he said dismissively. "That's what happens when you're exposed to so many new and exciting things at once. Everything's gonna be fine. My security measures are state-of-the-art. Nothing can get out. Now, eat your breakfast. We have a lot of work to do today." He walked away, his confidence unwavering, leaving Elora with a sense of unease that no amount of rationalization could soothe. She looked at her friends, their faces a mix of concern and skepticism. But in her mind, the vision of the compound in ruins and the screams of the dying was all too real. And Jace's words did nothing to calm her growing dread. Mutant Island, Chapter 4, The Herbivores. The morning sun cast long shadows as Jace led the group out of the main compound and toward a different section of the island. Unlike the sterile hallways of the lab, this part of the facility was open and lush, a fabricated paradise. The air smelled of damp earth and blooming flowers, a welcome change from the chemicals of the lab. "These are the herbivores," Jace announced, a note of genuine warmth in his voice. "They are the more friendly animals we have here. Most of them are giant, but they're not dangerous." As they walked, a massive creature with the body of a rhinoceros and the neck of a giraffe ambled past, munching on leaves from a towering tree. Its hide was a kaleidoscope of vibrant purples and blues, and its small, gentle eyes blinked slowly as it watched them. A herd of elephant-like beasts, with long, curving tusks made of what looked like polished stone, grazed peacefully in a field nearby. Their calls were deep and melodic, a low, rumbling song that seemed to vibrate in the air. Jace gestured to a large, woolly creature with the head of a moose and the wings of a butterfly. It was perched on a rock, its wings slowly fanning open and closed. "That's a moose squiddo," he said with a proud smile. "Harmless, but a bit skittish. We've found that giving them more space makes them more comfortable and easier to manage." Elora watched them, a sense of relief washing over her. These creatures were magnificent and strange, but they didn't hold the same malevolent energy as the cat humans or the Spino-Croc. This was what science was supposed to be about, creating something beautiful and new. Just as they were about to enter a clearing filled with luminous, glowing mushrooms, a series of alarms blared from the compound. The sound was different from Elora's dream, but it was just as jarring. A voice, tight with urgency, came over Jace's walkie-talkie. "Dr. Jace, we have an alert. A Category 4 hurricane has changed course. It's heading directly for the island." Jace grabbed the walkie-talkie, his face a mask of focus. "How much time?" "Less than 24 hours, the voice replied. "The models show it's accelerating. It'll hit sometime tomorrow afternoon." He clicked off the walkie-talkie and looked at the group, a flicker of something close to concern in his eyes. He quickly regained his composure, however, and his voice was as steady as ever. "A storm is on its way, but we still have a tour to finish. Let's keep going. We have work to do." He set off toward the glowing clearing, leaving the group to stare at each other, their minds reeling. A hurricane was coming, and Jace wanted to continue as if nothing had changed. The serene paradise around them suddenly felt a lot less secure. Mutant Island, Chapter 5, The Breakout. The wind howled like a banshee, tearing at the reinforced walls of the compound. Rain lashed against the windows, blurring the outside world into a chaotic smear of gray and green. Inside, the lights flickered erratically, casting long, dancing shadows that mimicked the thrashing branches outside. It was 9 p.m., and Hurricane Leviathan had arrived with a vengeance. Suddenly, with a deafening crack, the entire facility plunged into darkness. The emergency lights, a sickly red glow, immediately kicked in, but they only served to amplify the sense of dread. The blaring alarms from Elora's dream were no longer a figment of her imagination. They shrieked through the compound, a frantic symphony of impending doom. "What's happening?" Keel yelled over the din, his voice laced with terror. Jace, usually so composed, was wide-eyed, his small face pale in the emergency light. "The main power generator must have been hit," he stammered, frantically typing on a console. "Backup systems should be online, but the containment fields..." His words trailed off as a series of metallic groans echoed from deep within the labs, followed by a thunderous crash that vibrated through the very foundations of the building. "They're getting out," Sarah screamed, pointing down a hallway where a massive, shadowy form flickered in the emergency lights. It was unmistakable. The giant cat human, its green eyes glowing with predatory intent, was free. "Everyone, to the escape vehicles, now," Jace commanded, his voice regaining some of its usual authority, though a tremor was evident. They scrambled into a heavy-duty, armored transport parked in a secure garage. The vehicle was built like a tank, designed for traversing rough terrain, but as the female giant cat human emerged from the shadows, its terrifying roar shaking the garage, even the thick plating seemed fragile. The cat human lunged, its massive paw slamming against the side of the vehicle. The impact sent the escape car skidding, almost overturning. They righted themselves, but the beast wasn't giving up. It slammed into them again, its claws raking against the metal, sparks flying. The car rocked violently, and for a terrifying moment, Elora thought they were done for. "I know what to do," Jace yelled, his eyes suddenly clear, a spark of scientific genius overriding his fear. Before anyone could react, he threw open his door and, with surprising agility, dove out of the moving vehicle. "Get out of here," he shrieked, his voice barely audible over the roaring storm and the beast's growls. "I'll draw its attention." He wasn't suicidal, he was brilliant. Jace scrambled under the massive car, his small hands fumbling for something beneath the chassis. He located the fuel line, a thin tube carrying gas to the engine. With a quick, precise cut, he severed it. Gasoline poured onto the ground, mixing with the rainwater, creating a potent, odorous trail. Then, with a practiced motion, he pulled out a small, emergency smoke flare, igniting it. The thick, acrid smoke enveloped him, masking his scent. "Go, go, go," Jace's muffled yell urged them on. The driver, a terrified scientist, slammed the accelerator, and the armored car lurched forward, leaving Jace hidden beneath its bulk. The giant female cat human, momentarily confused by the sudden change in scent and the powerful smell of gasoline, lowered its head, sniffing at the ground. It followed the strongest scent, the trail of fuel, its massive head weaving back and forth. It was instinctively drawn to the more prominent smell, a primal response overriding its initial focus on the fleeing vehicle. The creature was a hunter, and Jace had just laid a very convincing trap for its senses. As the escape car sped away, bursting through a rapidly weakening perimeter gate, a horrific scene unfolded in its rearview mirror. A lone scientist, who had been attempting to make his own escape on foot, stumbled in the driving rain. Before he could regain his balance, the male giant cat human, its roars echoing through the night, pounced. There was a sickening crunch, a muffled scream, and then silence as the beast consumed its prey whole. The image was seared into their minds, a brutal testament to Elora's nightmare. They drove blindly into the thrashing jungle, the wind tearing at the trees, the ground uneven and treacherous. Behind them, they could hear the distant, frustrated roars of the giant cat human, now presumably following the pungent gasoline trail, unknowingly saving Jace's life. They were in the middle of a hurricane, in a jungle teeming with escaped mutant beasts, and their only guide was the desperate hope that Jace's brilliant, insane plan had actually worked. Mutant Island, Chapter 6. The Mutant Ecosystem. The armored car bounced and lurched through the storm-ravaged jungle. The trees, ancient and gnarled, whipped around them in a violent frenzy, and the headlights cut through the torrential rain, revealing a chaotic, unnatural landscape. The familiar sounds of the wilderness were gone, replaced by the howls of the wind and the guttural roars of unseen creatures. Inside the car, the silence was heavy, punctuated only by the thrum of the engine and the collective ragged breathing of the group. Elora, Keel, Owen, and Sarah huddled together, their faces pale with shock and fear. The last thing they saw was etched into their minds, a brutal, savage act of nature made even more terrifying by science. Why? Jace's voice, small and broken, cut through the quiet. He was shivering, not from the cold, but from a profound, deep-seated terror. Why did this have to happen? Did I go too far? Elora reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. No, she said, her voice steady despite her own fear. None of this is your fault. You couldn't have predicted this storm. It was an accident. Now, we just have to get out of this island. We have to make it to the coast. Jace looked up at her, his eyes filled with a desperate need for her words to be true. He was a boy again, stripped of his scientific bravado and faced with the horrifying consequences of his life's work. What do we do now? Owen asked, his voice shaking. Jace was silent for a long moment, the scientific part of his brain kicking in, calculating the odds, weighing the variables. He looked at the chaos outside, the trees snapping like twigs, the ground trembling with the heavy footsteps of his creations. Right now, he said, his voice regaining a fraction of its old confidence, but with a new, somber tone, we just try not to die. We drive as fast as we can and hope we don't run into anything else that wants to eat us. He was no longer a scientist, he was a survivor. The rules of his lab, the controlled environment of his creations, were gone. He was in their world now, a world he had created but could no longer control. As the night wore on, the group pedaled in the car, trying to sleep, but their minds were on the horrors that lurked in the darkness, a monument to a mad scientist's ambition. Mutant Island, Chapter 7. The Kitty. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world reborn. Sunlight filtered through the dripping leaves, casting a shimmering, emerald glow on the forest floor. The air, though still heavy with humidity, smelled clean and fresh. The group had survived the night, sleeping fitfully in the cramped confines of the escape car. Now, in the stark light of day, the full reality of their situation dawned on them. The island was no longer a contained lab, it was a wild, untamed ecosystem of mutated horrors, and they were a part of it. They ventured out of the car, their movements hesitant. The goal was to find a more permanent shelter and, more importantly, a new food source. The forest was an alien pantry, filled with strange, glowing fruits and multicolored berries. They cautiously gathered what looked most familiar: coconuts, some wild apples, and large, round berries that resembled grapes. Jace, his fear from the night before replaced with a detached, scientific curiosity, wandered off on his own, drawn by the allure of a particularly large cluster of grapes hanging from a twisting vine. He was reaching for the fruit when he heard a soft rustling. He froze, his hand inches from the cluster. He slowly turned his head, his heart pounding in his chest. A pair of curious, glowing green eyes stared back at him from the shadows of a large fern. It was a giant cat human, but it was small, no bigger than a large dog. Its limbs wobbly and its head comically oversized. It was a baby. Jace's scientific brain fought with his survival instincts. The creature was a perfect miniature of the beasts that had terrorized them the night before, but it lacked the menace. It tilted its head, its ears twitching. "And nice cat," Jace whispered, his voice trembling. The baby cat human took a step forward, its tail swishing back and forth like a metronome. It let out a small, high-pitched mew that was both adorable and unsettling. Jace felt his breath catch in his throat. This wasn't just a genetic mutation, this was a living, breathing creature. "Easy there," he said, forcing a calm he didn't feel into his voice. "Looks like you're not so bad." He slowly, carefully, began to back away. The baby cat human followed, its large green eyes never leaving him. It was curious, like a house cat with a new toy. Jace kept his hands in plain sight, his movements slow and deliberate. He took a step, then another, then a third, until he was out of the baby's sight. He didn't run. He just backed away, slowly, until he was sure he was a safe distance away. He returned to the group, his hands empty. "Where are the grapes?" Elora asked, noticing his empty hands. "And why are you so pale?" Jace looked at them, his face a mask of profound shock. He didn't answer right away. He just stared into the depths of the forest, his mind replaying the image of the small, wobbling creature with the glowing green eyes. "I had an encounter," he said, his voice flat. "I came back with nothing because they bred." The implication hung in the air, a new and horrifying realization. The creatures weren't just running wild, they were reproducing. This wasn't a temporary disaster. It was a new, permanent ecosystem, and they were trapped inside it. Mutant Island, Chapter 8, The Truth. The group had spent the better part of the morning scavenging for supplies. With the escape car's food reserves dwindling, their immediate survival depended on whatever the bizarre ecosystem could provide. While Elora, Keel, Owen, and Sarah searched for edible plants and fruits, Jace, his mood a mix of scientific fascination and lingering dread, was focused on something else entirely. He was mapping the animal trails, noting the patterns of the new mutant life he had inadvertently created. "We need to find a place to hunker down," Elora said, tossing a handful of multicolored berries into her bag, "and some sort of weapon. I'm tired of being helpless." Their search for anything resembling a tool led them to a small, dilapidated shed tucked away behind a thick cluster of glowing moss. The shed was unremarkable, looking like it had been forgotten decades ago, but the lock on the door was new and reinforced. After a few minutes of prying, Owen managed to break it. The inside was cramped and dark, filled with rusting equipment and discarded blueprints, but lying on a workbench, covered by a thin layer of dust, was a folder marked Top Secret. Elora's heart hammered against her ribs. She picked it up, her hands trembling as she opened it. The first page was a research log, filled with Jace's frantic, precise handwriting. It detailed his Project Chimera, specifically the creation of the giant cat humans. The notes were full of diagrams and chemical equations. But then Elora's eyes fell on a specific passage, a chilling confession that made the blood drain from her face. Day 78, the aggression inhibitors are complete. But after careful deliberation, I have decided not to use them. The subjects will be far more effective at discouraging intrusion and protecting the compound if they are highly aggressive. It is a necessary evil for the sake of scientific purity. Their feral nature is not a bug, it is a feature. Elora felt the folder slip from her fingers, her mind reeling. He had lied. The monsters that had torn apart the compound, that had killed a scientist, were not a mistake. They were exactly as he intended them to be. "He lied to us," Elora whispered, the words catching in her throat. What was this kid trying to do? She continued flipping through the documents, her anger and shock growing with each page. She saw blueprints for new containment facilities, with notes scribbled in the margins about enhanced security for more dangerous subjects. One page contained a list of proposed hybrids, with frightening combinations like reptilian, simian, and arachnid aquatic. She saw the words next-gen hybrids, Project Dominator in bold red ink. "There's more stuff," she said, her voice shaking with rage. He wasn't just working on the cat humans and the Spino croc. They made more dangerous hybrids. Keel, who had been looking over her shoulder, clenched his fists. "We need to talk to him about it. He lied to us. We need to know what else he's hiding." Mutant Island, Chapter 9, Exposed. The group found Jace a short distance away, sprawled on the ground beneath a tall, coconut-laden palm tree. He was clutching his arm, his face twisted in a wince. "Oh, God, that hurt," he groaned, sitting up slowly. He looked at the tree, then at them, and gave a sheepish shrug. "Yeah, I'm bad at climbing." Elora's anger, hot and fierce, burned away her initial concern. She didn't respond to his joke. Instead, she took a step forward, the folder clutched tightly in her hand. "What is this, Jace?" she demanded, holding the folder open to the page that detailed his confession. Jace's casual demeanor evaporated. His eyes went wide as he stared at the document, a look of profound shock and fear on his face. He scrambled to his feet, trying to snatch the folder from her hand. Oh, that's," he stammered, his words stumbling over themselves. "That's different hybrids. Experimental designs. Nothing important. Nothing important." Elora's voice rose to a furious shout. "You wrote that you intentionally made them aggressive. Jace, you lied to us. You said it was an accident, but you wanted them to be dangerous." He flinched at her tone, his shoulders slumping. He looked at the ground, at the folder, at the faces of his friends, all filled with a mix of betrayal and anger. The confidence he had radiated since their arrival on the island was gone, replaced by the vulnerability of a small, frightened child. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I really am. I needed something more dangerous to protect the facility, to deter people. I didn't mean for them to run free. I swear." He looked up, his eyes pleading. The hurricane was an anomaly. The security systems were supposed to hold. "I never thought they would get out. I just I wanted to make sure no one would ever try to steal my research. I wanted to protect it. I was trying to be the best. Ellery looked at him, at his tear-streaked face, at the small, fragile boy who had been pretending to be a brilliant, unflappable scientist. She looked at the other members of the group, and she saw a flicker of empathy in their eyes. He was a child, and he had made a terrible mistake. A mistake that had cost lives, yes, but a mistake nonetheless. The brilliance and the naivety were two sides of the same coin. She knelt down and wrapped her arms around him. "It's okay, Jace," she said, her voice soft. "We forgive you. We all make mistakes. Now, let's get out of here, together." Mutant Island, Chapter 10, The Scaled Serpent. With the truth laid bare and a fragile truce established, the group continued their desperate journey through the mutant-infested jungle. The immediate priority remained survival, and that meant finding a safe path to the coast, or at least a distress beacon. Jace, humbled and chastened, now walked with them, his scientific genius still active, but now tempered with a newfound caution. They had been trekking for hours, pushing through dense foliage and navigating treacherous, muddy terrain. The sounds of the jungle were a constant, unsettling symphony, the distant roars of predators, the rustling of unseen creatures, and the persistent, chirping chorus of mutated insects. As they emerged from a particularly thick cluster of bioluminescent ferns, a horrifying sight brought them to an immediate, silent halt. In a large, sun-dappled clearing, a creature of nightmare was feasting. It was a massive, humanoid serpent, at least 47 feet tall, its body a glistening mosaic of emerald and obsidian scales. Its upper torso was distinctly human-like, with powerful, scaled arms, but its lower half coiled into a thick, serpentine tail. A distinctly female form, she was hunched over the remains of what looked like a colossal elephant-horse hybrid, tearing at its flesh with sharp, dagger-like claws. Around her, nestled in a crude, enormous nest woven from giant leaves and twisted vines, were several massive, leathery eggs, each the size of a small car. The scaled serpent hissed, a sound like steam escaping a pressure cooker, as it tore another chunk from its prey. Its eyes, the color of molten gold, scanned the perimeter, possessive and dangerous. Jace, who had been about to point out a rare, edible fungus, froze, his mouth agape. The cockiness was entirely gone, replaced by genuine, unadulterated fear. "Yeah," he whispered, his voice barely a breath. "I definitely don't want to become lunch. Let's get out of here." Slowly, they retreated with painstaking slowness, each step carefully placed to avoid rustling leaves or snapping twigs. The image of the serpent's powerful jaws and gleaming scales was seared into their minds. This creature was not just aggressive, it was a territorial, apex predator, guarding its future offspring. It was a living, breathing testament to the untamed, terrifying potential of Jace's creations, now free to thrive and multiply in their new, savage ecosystem. The encounter left them shaken, reinforcing the perilous nature of their situation. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues, but the beauty of the sunset was lost on them. As darkness crept back into the jungle, they made their way back to the escape car, its armored shell now feeling less like a refuge, and more like a flimsy tin can in a world of giants. They huddled inside once more, the metallic scent of fear mingling with the lingering jungle humidity, praying for the dawn to bring something other than more horrors. Mutant Island, Chapter 11, The Dead. The morning was a mix of quiet apprehension and a desperate need to find a way out. The group decided to split up. Ellery, Keel, and Owen would search for a path that led toward the coast, while Jace, surprisingly, offered to stay near the escape car to keep an eye out for any approaching threats, and to continue his own reconnaissance. They moved as a silent unit, their senses on high alert. The jungle was a strange and eerie place in the daylight, with its mutated flora and unsettling quiet. They were pushing through a thicket of vines when Owen, who was in the lead, suddenly stopped and held up a hand. "Wait," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Ahead of them, half hidden by a cluster of broad-leafed plants, was the lifeless body of a scientist, his lab coat stained with dark, mottled splotches. His eyes were wide with terror, and deep, ragged claw marks tore through his chest. As they got closer, they saw the culprits, a group of creatures the size of large dogs, with the powerful hind legs of a raptor and the long, sharp snout and armored scales of a crocodile. They were Eudicroders, a hybrid of a Eutiraptor and a crocodile, and they were feasting on the remains. "Yeah, let's go this way," Owen said, his voice laced with disgust and fear. They turned and moved silently in the opposite direction, their stomachs churning. The sight of the scientist's body was a grim reminder that this wasn't just a strange, beautiful ecosystem, it was a brutal one. They walked for a long time, the image of the dead scientist seared into their minds, until they stumbled upon a small patch of mutated berries that looked remarkably like blueberries. They filled their bags, a small victory in a world of constant terror. Meanwhile, back at the escape car, Jace was feeling an old sense of frustration. He had an unquenchable thirst for knowledge, and he was determined to get a coconut for them all to share. He made another attempt to climb a tree, his small hands and feet scrabbling for purchase on the smooth bark. He got a few feet up before his grip slipped, and he came crashing down to the ground with a painful thud. "Yeah, I'm so not getting a coconut," he muttered, dusting himself off. As he was getting up, a flash of white caught his eye. He walked toward it, his scientific curiosity overriding his caution. It was a nest, a massive nest of smooth, pale, leathery eggs, each one as large as a man's head. His heart began to pound in his chest as he recognized them. "These are spinacroc eggs," he whispered, a mix of awe and terror in his voice. "Oh my God, they're not just breeding, they're thriving." A deep, guttural growl vibrated through the air, and Jace spun around. The mother spinacroc, a colossal beast of muscle and scales, was lumbering toward him, her massive jaws open in a snarl, a clear sign of her territorial nature. He was a threat to her offspring, and he was about to pay for it. He dodged to the side as she lunged, her powerful tail lashing out, narrowly missing him. He scrambled for a nearby tree, a tall, sturdy redwood, and began to climb with a frantic, desperate energy he never knew he possessed. The spinacroc circled the base of the tree, its roars of frustration echoing through the forest. It was too big to climb after him, and after a few minutes of enraged circling, it gave up, its primal instincts telling it not to waste its energy on an impossible hunt. It lumbered back to its nest, leaving Jace clinging to the tree, shaking with a cold fear he had never known before. He had survived, but he was more alone than ever. Island, Chapter 12, The Call. The sun was high in the sky when Jace finally felt it was safe to climb down from his perch. His legs were shaking, and the cold sweat of fear clung to him even in the humid air. He walked a few feet from the tree, his mind racing. His grand plans for a new world had fallen to pieces, and all that was left was a terrifying, beautiful, and deadly mess. He had to act. He couldn't be a scientist anymore. He had to be a leader. He had to be a survivor. "I have to come up with an idea for a shelter," he muttered to himself, his mind already formulating a plan. They couldn't stay in the escape car forever. The constant threat of being found by a giant cat human, or another hungry predator, was too great. He needed something solid, something defensible. Meanwhile, Elora, Keel, and Owen were continuing their desperate search for a way out. They stumbled upon a small, crumbling building, half hidden by overgrown vines and moss. It was a small, abandoned laboratory, its windows shattered and its door hanging precariously on a single hinge. Inside, the air was stale and thick with dust. On a workbench, beneath a pile of broken equipment and scattered papers, was a small, grimy satellite phone. The display was dark, and a faint layer of dust covered it, but it was a beacon of hope in this wasteland. Next to it was a handwritten note on a crumpled piece of paper, its ink smudged by time and moisture. The note read, "Everything IS broke. If you are reading this, it is too late for a rescue team. Call 1212446. A wave of despair washed over them. It was a warning, a desperate cry for help from a scientist who had clearly given up all hope. But the phone was still there, a tiny chance. With trembling hands, Elora picked up the phone. It powered on, the screen flickering to life. She typed in the number from the note, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The phone rang once, then twice, then a third time. A line of static hissed, and then a whisper, faint and eerie, came from the receiver. It wasn't a voice, it was just a disembodied sound, a low, constant whisper that sent a chill down their spines. "Hello," Elora said into the phone, her voice shaking. "Is anyone there?" The whispering continued, growing louder, more frantic. It sounded like 1,000 voices speaking all at once, a cacophony of sound that was both incomprehensible and terrifying. It wasn't human, it was something else. Elora felt a wave of nausea, and her hand shook. She dropped the phone as if it had burned her, the whispering ending abruptly as it hit the ground. A final, chilling sound, like a dying gasp, came from the speaker before the screen went dark. The phone was dead. They stared at each other, their faces pale. The message was clear. There was no one coming to save them. They were alone. Mutant Island, Chapter 13, The Ambush. The group returned to the escape car, their spirits low after the chilling discovery of the satellite phone. They found Jace nursing a fresh bruise on his forehead, a smear of dirt on his cheek, and a small, triumphant smile on his face. In his hands, he held a perfectly cracked coconut, its sweet-smelling water glistening inside. "I got one," he said, holding it out to them, "but I think the tree won. I fell a few times." "Damn," Keel said, shaking his head. Jace's smile faded as he took in their grim expressions. "What's wrong? You look like you just saw a ghost." Elora recounted their discovery, the dead scientist, the Uticroders, and the terrifying phone call. Jace's face fell, the boyish pride replaced by a solemn understanding. "Damn," he said, the single word carrying the weight of the impossible situation they were in. "There's no one coming. We're on our own." The group sat in silence for a few moments, the coconut forgotten. Their immediate problems were still the same, but the hope of a rescue team was now gone. They were truly alone. The immediate need for water became their new focus. The sweet coconut water would only last so long. "We need fresh water," Owen said, looking around the dense foliage. "We can't survive much longer without it." Jace, ever the scientist, remembered a large lake he had seen on his makeshift map. "I know where there's a lake," he said. "It's about an hour's walk from here. It's probably our best shot." They made their way through the jungle, the sounds of the mutated creatures filling the air. As they approached the lake, they saw a herd of elephant horses drinking from the murky water. Their long, horse-like necks stretched out as their tusks glistened in the sunlight. The scene was peaceful, a rare moment of tranquility in this chaotic world. Then, with a terrifying splash, the water erupted. A massive, finned creature, a giant humanoid shark with powerful, muscular arms, launched itself from the depths. It moved with a silent, deadly grace, its powerful jaws clamping down on the neck of one of the elephant horses. The giant beast let out a gut-wrenching shriek as it was dragged, helpless, back into the water. The serene lake turned a shocking, vibrant red, the water churning with the struggling animal. "Run!" Elora screamed. They scrambled away from the shoreline, but as Jace and Owen tried to push through a tangle of vines, their feet became entangled. They were stuck, a terrifying, helpless moment as the mutated shark, its golden eyes fixed on them, began to lurch out of the water. Its powerful fins sliced through the air, and its body, surprisingly agile for its size, began to pull itself onto the shore. "It's trying to get us," Owen yelled, struggling against the thick vines. "Go, I'm not leaving you," Jace yelled back, pulling on a vine with all his might. The shark-human hybrid was gaining on them, its mouth open to reveal rows of razor-sharp teeth. With a final, desperate heave, Jace's vines broke free, and he pulled on Owen's. They stumbled, fell, then scrambled to their feet and ran, their hearts pounding in their chests. The creature, designed for the water, was slow and clumsy on land. It gave up the chase after a few yards, its powerful body unable to keep up with their panicked flight. They ran all the way back to the car, their lungs burning and their legs aching. As they got closer, a different kind of surprise awaited them. Jace, in his brief time alone, had created a magnificent shelter. Using the car as a base, he had woven a roof of large, waterproof leaves, reinforced the walls with sturdy branches, and created a small, defensible fire pit. "I had to come up with an idea for a shelter," he said with a small smile. They were safe for now. They ate the last of their food, drank from the coconut, and settled into the shelter, the sounds of the terrifying jungle slowly lulling them to sleep. Mutant Island, Chapter 14, The Survivors. The sun was a warm, golden promise when Elora, Keel, and Owen woke. Jace was already up, his small form a silhouette against the rising sun as he meticulously checked the perimeter of their shelter. He had been awake for hours, his mind racing with plans and observations, sketching maps of the jungle floor in his small notebook. The trauma of the previous night seemed to have galvanized him, sharpening his focus and determination. They packed up their meager supplies and continued their trek through the dense forest. The jungle's sounds were different now, more alive, a complex symphony of roars and chirps that they were slowly learning to distinguish. They walked in a tight formation, their eyes scanning the undergrowth for any sign of a threat. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the trees. It was a human scream, and it was followed by the sounds of a struggle and a guttural, reptilian shriek. Without a word, the group sketching maps of the jungle floor in his small notebook. The trauma of the previous night seemed to have galvanized him, sharpening his focus and determination. They packed up their meager supplies and continued their trek through the dense forest. The jungle's sounds were different now, more alive, a complex symphony of roars and chirps that they were slowly learning to distinguish. They walked in a tight formation, their eyes scanning the undergrowth for any sign of a threat. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the trees. It was a human scream, and it was followed by the sounds of a struggle and a guttural, reptilian shriek. Without a word, the group followed the noise, their hearts pounding. They emerged into a small clearing to find a scene of savage desperation. A group of men and women, their clothes torn and faces grim with resolve, were butchering a large, feathered crocodile. This was a juvenile, but it was still a terrifying hybrid. Its scales were a dark, oily green, and its teeth were long and serrated. It was a terrifying creation, a genetic fusion of a crocodile and a bird of prey. One of the survivors, a woman with a wild, determined look in her eyes, plunged a knife into the creature's heart. A few feet away, a small fire crackled, and another group of survivors was cooking a piece of the reptile on a makeshift spit. There were 7 of them, all scientists who had clearly been living off the land, honed by the constant threat of death. They were the surviving sentient inhabitants of the island. The group watched them for a moment, an understanding passing between them. These people had found a way to survive, a way to fend for themselves in this new, dangerous world. They didn't need their help, and they had clearly found a way to fend for themselves. The group turned and quietly walked away, leaving the survivors to their grim feast. Their journey led them to the base of a towering mountain. They began the long, arduous climb, hoping to get a better vantage point of the island. As they neared the summit, they came across a herd of mutated llamas, their woolly coats streaked with bioluminescent patterns. As soon as the llamas saw them, they let out a series of strange, panicked bleats and scrambled away, their large hooves thundering against the rock. Disappointed, the group began their descent. As they neared the base, they were once again met with a scene of brutal predation. A giant human-snake hybrid, its scaly body a thick rope of muscle, was coiled around a Utacroctor. The human-snake hybrid was a terrifying sight, its powerful arms holding the smaller creature tight as it slowly crushed the life out of it. The Utacroctor let out a series of painful yelps, its last desperate cries echoing through the jungle. "Let's get out of here," Jace whispered, the image of his creation dying a brutal death unsettling him. They turned and walked away, the sounds of the dying creature slowly fading behind them. Days passed, one after another, each day blending into the next. Their hopes of finding a way off the island began to dwindle. They were lost in an ecosystem they didn't understand, surrounded by creatures they had no business being near. It seemed as though they had walked 1,000,000 miles and had found nothing. Mutant Island, Chapter 15, The Screams. The camp was quiet, a small bubble of temporary safety in a world of chaos. After days of fruitless searching, the group had decided to make a plan. They needed to find a new area to explore, one with more resources, and they needed to do it soon. They left Jace behind, his small form hunched over his notebook, drawing intricate maps of the flora and fauna of the island. He was safe, he had told them, and they had to trust him. But as they walked, a low rumble, like a distant earthquake, vibrated through the ground. A wave of unease washed over them, but they pushed on, their destination the only thing that mattered. Back at the camp, Jace felt the vibrations too. He looked up, his eyes scanning the canopy above him. The rustling wasn't from the wind. It was too heavy, too deliberate. The hissing was a sound he knew all too well, and it sent a cold shiver down his spine. He looked up, and his heart leaped into his throat. A massive, female cat human, its sleek black fur blending seamlessly with the shadows of the trees, was perched on a high branch, its glowing green eyes fixed on him. "No," he whispered, a single word of profound, broken-hearted horror. The cat human dropped silently to the ground, its powerful paws landing with a soft thud. It was fully grown, its muscles rippling beneath its glossy coat. It approached him, a low, menacing growl rumbling in its chest. Jace scrambled to his feet, his mind screaming at him to run. He ran, blindly, his legs pumping, but he was no match for the creature's speed. He tripped on a thick vine, tumbling to the ground. He looked back, and in a single, terrifying moment, the cat human was upon him. Its massive paw, its claws retracted for now, clamped down on his chest. "No, no, Nilu!" Jace screamed, the sound of his voice tearing through the air, a final, desperate plea for help. The team, far away, heard the scream. It was a high, terrified sound that cut through the sounds of the jungle. Their blood ran cold, and they turned and ran back to the camp. When they arrived, the scene was one of utter destruction. The shelter was in shambles, the car dented and scratched, and the ground was littered with torn leaves and splintered wood. The ground was also marked with massive, cat-like paw prints. In the center of the wreckage lay a single, white lab coat, Jace's sweater. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. "What happened here?" she gasped, her eyes wide with fear and grief. Keel, his voice low and choked with emotion, replied, "Something big." "Where is Jace?" Owen asked, his voice filled with a desperate, terrible hope. Ella knelt and picked up the white sweater, her hands trembling. "The giant cat took him," she whispered, the terrible truth a lump in her throat. "He's dead." Sarah shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No, no," she whimpered, the word a broken plea against an impossible reality. Ella stood up, her face a mask of cold resolve. "We can't lose one more person. We need to move. Now," they agreed, a grim acceptance passing between them. With heavy hearts, they packed up what little they had left and moved to a different part of the island, a place near the lake where the docile, giant herbivores lived. They hoped the herbivore's sheer size would be a deterrent to any predators, a natural protective barrier. The move was a somber one, their shared grief a heavy weight in the silence. Mutant Island, Chapter 16, The Elephant and the Hyenas. The air was heavy and thick, a palpable tension settling over the group as they moved toward the lake. The loss of Jace was a wound that hadn't healed, a constant ache in their hearts. They walked in silence, their footsteps muffled by the soft earth, their eyes constantly scanning the shadows. They had to be more careful now, more vigilant. As they neared a river that fed into the lake, a low, guttural chittering sound caught their attention. They crept forward, peeking through a screen of ferns, and a horrifying scene unfolded before them. A pack of saber-toothed hyenas, their bodies lean and wiry, their jaws filled with impossibly long, curving fangs, were devouring a normal, African elephant. The elephant was on its side, its massive frame a testament to the savagery of its attackers. The hyenas tore at the flesh with a feverish intensity, their coats stained with blood. The pack suddenly stopped their feeding, their heads snapping up in unison, their beady, black eyes fixed on the group. A chorus of angry chitters rose from their throats, and they began to move toward them, a wave of predatory hunger in their eyes. "Get ready," Keel whispered, raising his rifle. It was a standard-issue weapon, but in this new world, it felt like a toy. He took a deep breath, aimed, and fired. The shot was deafening, the sound echoing through the jungle. One of the hyenas, the largest of the pack, fell to the ground with a sickening thud, a dark stain spreading across its chest. The rest of the hyenas, spooked by the loud noise and the death of their leader, scattered, disappearing into the undergrowth like ghosts. The group stood in the silence that followed, their hearts pounding in their chests. They had a moment of respite, but they knew it wouldn't last. They needed to find fresh water. They crept toward the river, their eyes fixed on its surface, a mix of desperate thirst and profound fear. They knew the giant shark human was down there, and they knew it was waiting, but they had no choice. "Nothing is safe," Ella said, her voice a hollow echo. "This is every man for themselves." They took a long, desperate drink from the river, the cold water a temporary balm for their fear. They were on their own, surrounded by monsters, and the only rule that mattered now was survival. Mutant Island, Chapter 17, The Return. The night had fallen, a thick, inky blackness that enveloped the jungle. The air was cold, and the eerie sounds of the mutated animals seemed to multiply in the darkness. The group moved with a quiet, practiced stealth, their hearts still heavy with the loss of their youngest member. They had been walking for hours, a desperate, hopeless march through the wilderness, when a faint flicker of light caught Elara's eye. It was an unnatural light, not the cool glow of a bioluminescent plant but the warm, orange glow of a fire. They crept closer, their hands on their weapons, their senses on high alert. Tucked away in a small cave, a figure was hunched over, his back to them, striking two rocks together to create a spark. As a small fire began to catch, the light illuminated his face. It was Jace. He was alive. His face was streaked with dirt, and there were several angry-looking cuts and bruises on his arms and legs, crudely bandaged with what looked like torn leaves and vines. "That's him," Sarah whispered, her voice a mix of shock and profound relief. Keel's voice was filled with a desperate, disbelieving hope. "Jace?" The boy looked up, his eyes wide and afraid, his hands instinctively going for a large, sharpened rock by his side. "Huh, who was that?" They stepped out of the shadows and into the warmth of the fire. The look on Jace's face shifted from fear to a profound, overwhelming relief. He scrambled to his feet, a wave of emotion washing over him. "You guys," he said, his voice raw, "I thought I'd never see you again." He gestured toward his bruised body. "I got taken. You probably saw what happened at camp, right?" "Yes," Owen said, his voice choked with emotion. Jace slowly sat back down by the fire, his body aching. "The cat, it didn't kill me. It took me back to its nest. The baby cat human was there. The mom was going to, well, you know. But the baby, it was curious. It didn't hiss or growl at me. It just nudged me with its head. The mom was confused, I think. It looked at the baby, then at me, then at the baby again. The baby kept nudging me, purring, and the mom she just left. It was like she was telling me she wasn't a threat. It was so weird." He looked at the group, the disbelief still in his eyes. "I ran as fast as I could. I've been hiding and moving ever since. I've been on my own. I didn't think anyone else survived." They huddled around the fire, a sense of relief settling over them. They were a team again. The group decided to share their water and what little food they had. Jace explained that the giant cat human's purring had somehow calmed his fears, allowing him to escape. He also said that the reason why the cat human didn't kill him was because its instincts told him that he was no threat, as it was more interested in its new baby. The warmth of the fire was a welcome contrast to the cold dread they had been living with for days. For the first time since the storm, there was a glimmer of hope. They had found each other, and they had a shelter. They had a leader again. Jace, bruised and battered but alive, was their beacon in the darkness. Mutant Island, Chapter 18, Day 40. 40 days. It felt like a lifetime. The initial terror had faded, replaced by a dull, constant ache of exhaustion and a grim determination to survive. They had established a routine, a rhythm of scavenging and defense. The cave, once a temporary refuge, was now their home. Jace, a ghost of the boy they once knew, had changed. The trauma of his near-death experience and the weight of his creations had transformed him from an arrogant child to a grimly resourceful leader. This morning, while the others slept, Jace ventured out, not for food, but for something more precious, hope. He scoured the wreckage of the main compound, a haunting monument to his past hubris. He was searching for a way to communicate, for a chance to call for help, even if the last message had warned them against it. He found a tangled mess of copper wires, a smashed satellite phone, and a toolbox with a few salvageable instruments. He returned to the cave and immediately got to work, his small hands moving with a practiced, focused precision. He meticulously stripped the wires, rewired the shattered phone, and used a small screwdriver to reroute circuits. It was a painstaking, almost impossible task, but it was all they had. While Jace was at work, the rest of the group set out to find food. They had been surviving on roots and fruits for a while, and the craving for meat was a constant, gnawing hunger. They stumbled upon a clearing where a bizarre spectacle was unfolding. A herd of 51 elephant goats, creatures with the bodies of elephants and the shaggy coats and spiraling horns of mountain goats, were engaged in a brutal fight for dominance. The largest one, its massive tusks chipped and scarred, roared in victory. Its challenge met with the subservient bleating of its defeated rivals. It then, with a show of force, slammed its head into the back of the previous leader, sending it to the ground. The group watched in silent awe, a grim reminder of the brutal hierarchy of this new world. Back at the cave, Keel was keeping watch, his rifle clutched in his hands. The air was thick with a strange, feral energy. He felt a prickle on the back of his neck, and turned just as a shadowy form detached itself from the trees behind him. It was a saber-toothed hyena, its powerful jaws and curving fangs a horrifying sight. It was the second largest of the pack, the new leader, and its eyes were fixed on him with a chilling, intelligent hatred. It was a personal hunt. The hyena lunged, its powerful body a blur of muscle and fur. Keel reacted on instinct. He raised his rifle and fired. The shot was deafening, the sound echoing through the trees as the hyena fell with a guttural yelp, a dark stain spreading across its chest. Keel didn't wait to see if it was dead. He turned and ran, sprinting toward the safety of the cave. He burst through the entrance, his lungs burning, and immediately began to roll a large boulder in front of the opening. He blocked it off, a primitive barricade against an unstoppable enemy. Inside, Jace looked up from his work, his face pale. What was that? Keel, gasping for breath, could only point to the barricaded entrance. The hyenas, he choked out. They were hunting me. Jace's expression hardened. He understood. The hyenas wouldn't forget. They were smart, and they would be back. He picked up his tools, his eyes fixed on the small, broken phone in his hands. They had to get a signal. It was their only hope. Mutant Island, Chapter 19, The Rescue. Jace worked tirelessly, his hands a blur of motion as he pieced together the remnants of the communication equipment. The others watched, their faces a mix of doubt and desperate hope. It had been 40 days, and every day felt like a week. The jungle had become their world, and the idea of escaping it felt like a distant, impossible dream. Jace, however, was a stubborn realist. He knew the odds, and he knew that without a rescue, they were all living on borrowed time. He held the cobbled together phone to his ear, his thumb hovering over the send button. The others held their breath. He pressed it, and for a long, agonizing moment, there was nothing but static. Then, a low crackle, and a voice, faint but clear, came through the receiver. "This is a general distress channel. Who is this?" Jace's heart leaped into his throat. "This is DR. Jace from the Isla Lubler Research Facility," he said, his voice trembling with relief. "We're alive. We need a rescue team. The security systems failed. We're trapped here." The voice on the other end was silent for a moment. Then, "Isla Lubler, we thought the project was abandoned. We received no distress signals. Are you certain of your location?" "Yes," Jace insisted, a desperate urgency in his voice. "The name is correct. We've been here for 40 days. The storm, it was an anomaly. Our creations are, they're running wild. The place is a death trap. We need a rescue team now." The voice on the other end was calm, professional. "Understood. Our nearest vessel is 10 days out. We will send a team to your coordinates. Stay where you are. We'll be there as soon as possible." Jace's hand trembled as he lowered the phone. 10 days. It was an eternity and a lifetime all at once. But they had a chance. They had hope. As they waited, the group did not idle. Their survival instincts, honed by the constant threat of death, were on high alert. They moved with a newfound purpose, and they were constantly on guard. They knew the second largest saber-toothed hyena was out there, and they knew it was hunting Keel. Days turned into a grueling week. One morning, Jace, ever the observer, noticed something on his makeshift map. He had been tracking the locations of the giant cat humans, and the numbers were staggering. He had seen the small, curious baby cat human, but he had underestimated the scale of the breeding. "I've been tracking their movements," he said, his voice a low, grim whisper. "Based on the patterns and the population density, I've come to a terrifying conclusion. There are at least 200 giant cat humans on this island. Most of them are juveniles. They're not just surviving, they're thriving. This isn't just a breakout, this is the start of a new species." The news was a gut punch, a chilling reminder of the irreversible damage his ambition had caused, but it was also a grim validation of their fight for survival. This was no longer just about them, it was about the future, a future they had accidentally unleashed. On the 10th day, a helicopter, a beautiful, humming beacon of hope, appeared on the horizon. The rescue team, heavily armed and armored, landed on the beach and evacuated them. The escape was quick and efficient, but as they lifted off, they could see the island below them. A beautiful, green paradise on the surface, but a living, breathing ecosystem of horror underneath. They were rescued, but the island remained, a monument to a mad scientist's ambition and the frightening reality of an uncontrolled ecosystem. The story of Mutant Island had come to an end for them, but for the creatures they had left behind, it was just beginning. Mutant Island, Chapter 20, The Final Fight. The helicopter ascended, carrying Elora, Keel, Owen, Sarah, and Jace away from the verdant nightmare that was Isla Lubler. Relief, so potent it was almost dizzying, washed over them. They were safe, they were free, but their escape was not to be a clean one. As they cleared the tree line, a colossal shadow detached itself from the canopy. The oldest male giant cat human, a titan of muscle and fury, launched itself with impossible force. It slammed into the side of the helicopter, its immense weight and sharp claws tearing at the metal. The helicopter lurched violently, alarms blaring as it spiraled out of control, crashing with a sickening crunch into the dense jungle below. Disoriented and bruised, the group scrambled from the wreckage. The rescue team, though shaken, were quickly on their feet, rifles at the ready. But the crash had drawn attention. From the depths of the jungle, the scaled serpent, the giant human-snake hybrid, slithered into view, its golden eyes fixed on the downed aircraft. And then, the two giant cat humans, the male who had brought them down, and the female, its mate, emerged from the undergrowth, their green eyes glowing with predatory hunger. Before anyone could react, a monstrous wave erupted from a nearby river. The giant shark human, its fin slicing through the air, lunged with terrifying speed. One of the rescue team members, a young man who had just managed to clamber out of the helicopter, had no time to react. The shark human was upon him in an instant, its colossal jaws clamping down with bone-crushing force. A single, choked scream, and then silence. The water where he had stood boiled red. The jungle floor became an arena. The two giant cat humans and the human-snake hybrid, perhaps seeing the shark human as a rival, turned their aggression on the aquatic menace. A cacophony of roars, hisses, and slithering scales filled the air as the titans clashed. The cat humans slashed with their claws, the snake human coiled and struck with incredible speed, all focused on the shark human. It was a brutal, primeval ballet, a clash of titans Jace himself had unwittingly orchestrated. The shark human, outmatched by the combined assault, let out a guttural roar of defiance as it was driven back, its powerful body battered by their attacks. Just as it seemed on the verge of being overwhelmed, a new, terrifying sound echoed through the clearing, a deep, resonant bellow that shook the very ground. A truly colossal crocodile, easily 100 feet long, its hide scarred and ancient, burst from the river, its immense jaws snapping at the fleeing shark human. It missed by inches, its frustration evident in another earth-shaking roar as the shark human, seizing its chance, scrambled away, disappearing into the cover of the dense foliage. The remaining three giants, having dispatched their common enemy, seemed to lose interest in the smaller humans. They turned and lumbered back into the jungle, their heavy footsteps receding into the distance. The group, hiding behind a fallen tree, watched them go, their hearts in their throats. They had survived, again, against impossible odds. Just as despair began to settle in, the familiar thrum of helicopter blades filled the air. A backup rescue helicopter, alerted by the crash, descended cautiously into the clearing. This time, the evacuation was swift and uneventful. As they lifted off, leaving the wreckage and the horrors behind, Elora, Keel, Owen, Sarah, and Jace looked back at Isla Lubler. It was a green jewel in the vast ocean, beautiful and deadly, a world reshaped by their ambition and their mistakes. The island slowly vanished from sight, disappearing beneath the clouds. They were safe, but the silence in the helicopter was heavy, filled with unspoken questions. What future awaited them? They had witnessed the birth of a new, terrifying ecosystem, a world where humanity was no longer at the top of the food chain. As the island faded from view, one haunting question lingered in their minds, a question that would echo through their nightmares for years to come. Is humanity doomed?